How did getting engaged ruin your life? You need to call off your engagement right now because I'm the older sister and I get married first, my sister said, grabbing my hand to examine my ring. Cancel everything or I'll make sure your wedding never happens. I started laughing without meaning to. I'd been with Ryson for 6 years and she'd only been dating her boyfriend for 3 months. I'm not canceling my wedding because you think there's an order, I said. It's not what I think, it's how families work, she said, trying to pull the ring off my finger. I'm 28 and you're 25, so you wait your turn. That's insane, I said, yanking my hand back. Either you postpone until after I'm married or I'll destroy your relationship, she said. Mom agrees that it's humiliating for me to be the single older sister at your wedding. I left with my fiancé and we spent the whole day imitating her and cracking ourselves up. But we had no idea the nightmare that we'd just stepped into. 3 weeks later, we got notified that my sister was suing us for intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming my engagement was designed to humiliate her and destroy her romantic prospects. She hired a lawyer who argued that younger siblings getting married first caused documented psychological damage to older siblings, and she demanded a restraining order preventing me from planning any wedding activities until she was married. She brought her boyfriend to court and tried to force him to propose right there in front of the judge, but he said they'd only been dating 12 weeks and walked out. The judge dismissed everything immediately, but she filed complaints with every venue in town saying I was committing fraud by booking them under false pretenses since she was supposed to get married first. After months of harassment, she showed up at my bridal shower with a wedding dress on, announcing that she was getting married that same day to a man she'd met online the night before. She'd hired someone from Craigslist to be her groom, paying him $500 to go through with a ceremony in my parents' backyard during my party. She tried to force all my guests to watch her get married first, but the guy took the money and left when he realized she was unstable. She chased him down the street in the wedding dress screaming that he was ruining her life, then came back and set up a projector showing a PowerPoint about birth order and marriage statistics, while my bridesmaids sat there stunned. The week before my wedding, she broke into the venue to set up her own wedding decorations over mine, convinced she could have her wedding there first. She was dragging in a massive arch made of fake flowers she'd built herself, but it was so heavy and unwieldy that she couldn't control it. She tried to hoist it up the main staircase but lost her grip and it rolled back down, taking her with it like a human bowling ball. She tumbled down 3 flights tangled in tulle and artificial roses, then got up and tried again with an even bigger arch. This time she made it to the ballroom but tripped over her own decoration box and crashed through the wedding cake table, then bounced off and went flying into the chocolate fountain she was trying to replace with her own. She got up covered in chocolate and tried to hang her Sarah's wedding banner, but grabbed the wrong rope and pulled down the entire ceiling drapery on herself. She was so tangled in fabric that she couldn't see, and walked straight into the DJ booth, electrocuting herself on the sound equipment and short-circuiting the entire building. The shock made her hair stand straight up and fried her nervous system so badly that half her face wouldn't move properly anymore. "You did this to my face because you couldn't wait your turn," she said from her hospital bed, her hair still sticking up in patches and her face twitching from the electrical damage. "I'll never get married now because you had to go first." "How is any of this my fault when I wasn't even there?" I said, but my mom squeezed my arm hard. "Your sister's face is paralyzed because you refused to respect birth order," she said, while my sister tried to cry, but only one eye would close. I got married at a different venue, but couldn't smile in any of the photos, because my entire family spent the ceremony in the hospital with my sister. They posted pictures of her singed hair and twitching face next to my wedding photos, saying I'd stolen her chance at love by refusing to wait. My husband's family whispered about what kind of person would drive their sister to break into a venue, and even my own bridesmaids said they felt guilty celebrating while my sister was suffering. The wedding video showed empty seats where my family should have been, and my mom's speech via phone from the hospital was about how some people couldn't wait their turn. I couldn't believe how quickly everything had spun out of control, but I had no idea how much worse things would still get. My phone started buzzing on the nightstand, and I grabbed it to see 57 missed calls from my mom. The voicemail she left made my stomach drop as her voice shook while explaining that my sister's face might never fully recover from the electrical damage. She kept repeating that I needed to come to the hospital immediately to apologize for ruining my sister's life by refusing to wait my turn. I sat up in bed and started crying so hard I couldn't breathe while Ryson wrapped his arms around me and pulled me against his chest. The tears wouldn't stop coming as I thought about all those empty seats at our wedding where my family should have been sitting. My mom's phone speech from the hospital kept playing in my head with her cold voice saying some people just couldn't wait their turn. Ryson rubbed my back and suggested we could take a few days away to let things calm down, but I knew running wouldn't fix any of this. We got dressed and drove to the hospital in silence while I stared out the window trying to prepare myself for what we'd find. My sister was propped up in the hospital bed with her hair sticking up in burnt patches like she'd been struck by lightning. The left side of her face twitched every few seconds in a way that made her eye close and her mouth pull sideways. She tried to scream at me when we walked in, but only half her mouth would move, so the words came out all wrong and slurred. My mom jumped up from her chair and followed us out to the parking lot where she spotted my wedding bouquet in the back seat. She yanked open the car door and grabbed the flowers before I could stop her. She marched back into the hospital and threw them in the trash can by the entrance while loudly telling everyone who passed that I didn't deserve flowers when my sister's face was destroyed. The nurses at the desk stared as she explained how I'd caused all this by refusing to respect birth order and getting married first. That night, I was scrolling through my phone when I saw my sister had posted photos of her damaged face right next to my wedding pictures. She'd written a long post about how I stole her future by refusing to wait my turn to get married. Within hours, hundreds of strangers were commenting on the posts calling me selfish and cruel for celebrating while she suffered. People I'd never met were sending me messages saying I was a monster for putting my happiness above family. Ryson's phone rang the next day, and I could hear his parents' careful voices through the speaker. They kept asking if there was more to the story about why my sister would break into a wedding venue. Their polite doubt felt like another loss piled on top of everything else that had already gone wrong. Monday morning, I'd barely sat down at my desk when HR called me into their office. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint saying I was mentally unstable and dangerous to my coworkers. The complaint included screenshots of my sister's social media posts showing her injuries and claiming I'd caused them. I went back to my desk and started putting everything in a folder with shaking hands. Every post my sister made got printed and dated, along with every message and voicemail from my mom. Blair Stone from accounting saw me crying at the printer and helped me organize all the dates and take screenshots of everything. She stayed late helping me document the timeline of harassment while more messages kept coming in. After 2 weeks of constant phone calls and messages and posts, Ryson finally convinced me we needed legal help. He found an attorney named Winston Poole who specialized in harassment cases and made us an appointment. Winston sat behind his desk and listened to the whole story without interrupting once. He looked through all the documentation Blair had helped me organize and nodded while reading the messages. When I finished talking, he leaned back in his chair and said we had a strong case for harassment. He pulled out a legal pad and started writing down everything we needed to do immediately. We had to document every single contact attempt from my family going forward without responding to any of it. He gave us the name of a locksmith to change all our locks that same day. We needed to install security cameras around our apartment building to catch any unwanted visits. Winston explained that my sister's injuries were tragic, but they didn't give her the right to terrorize me. He said the electrical accident was her own fault from breaking into the venue, and we weren't responsible for her choices. The most important thing was to stop all contact with my family immediately, and let him handle any communication. He warned us this would probably get worse before it got better. But we had the law on our side. I left his office feeling scared, but also relieved that someone finally believed this wasn't my fault. The drive home from Winston's office took forever because Ryson kept pulling over to let me check my phone for new messages. My phone buzzed with a voicemail notification from my mom, and my stomach twisted into knots before I even played it. Her voice came through the speaker cold and flat, nothing like the warm mother who used to braid my hair and make me hot chocolate when I was sick. She said if I didn't publicly apologize and admit I should have waited my turn to get married, she'd make sure everyone in town knew what kind of person I really was. The message played on repeat in my head while Ryson drove us home, and I stared out the window at the passing buildings. That night I couldn't sleep and kept checking my phone every few minutes for more threats or posts about me being a monster. Ryson found me sitting on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m, scrolling through my sister's latest post showing her medical bills next to my wedding photos. He sat down next to me and took my phone away, then pulled up his laptop and started typing something I couldn't see. The next morning he told me he'd booked us an appointment with a therapist named Laura Reynolds for that afternoon. I didn't want to go because talking to strangers about family problems felt like betrayal, but I was drowning in guilt and needed help. The waiting room at Laura's office had soft gray walls and a white noise machine that made ocean sounds. Laura came out exactly on time, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and glasses that made her look like a librarian. Her office had 2 chairs facing each other and tissues on every surface, which made me want to cry before we even started talking. She asked me to tell her what brought me there, and I started from the beginning with my sister grabbing my engagement ring. I talked for 40 minutes straight while she took notes on a yellow legal pad and nodded without interrupting. When I finished, she put down her pen and looked at me with eyes that seemed to see right through all my defenses. She explained how my mom had trained me from childhood to be responsible for my sister's feelings and happiness. The birth order excuse was just another way to control me and make me feel guilty for living my own life. She said what my sister did to herself at the venue wasn't my fault, and I wasn't responsible for her choices. I started crying so hard I couldn't breathe because no one had ever said those words to me before. Laura handed me tissues and waited while I sobbed about the empty wedding seats and my mom's hospital speech about waiting turns. She helped me see the pattern of how every achievement in my life got turned into something I should feel guilty about. After the session, I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive because my whole body was shaking. That night, I opened my laptop and started typing a message to my family about boundaries and respect. I wrote 3 pages about how I loved them, but couldn't keep being blamed for my sister's choices and injuries. Every time I moved my cursor to the send button, I'd picture my sister's face twitching in the hospital bed. I saved the draft and closed the laptop, then deleted it, then recovered it from the trash, then saved it again. Ryson found me staring at the screen at midnight and gently closed the laptop without saying anything. The next morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Raina Waite from the wedding venue needed to discuss the damages from my sister's break-in, which totaled over $10,000. She described the destroyed decorations, the electrical system that needed complete rewiring, and the chocolate fountain that had to be replaced. But then her voice got softer, and she said she'd been the venue manager for 15 years and never seen anything like what my sister did. She offered to send me the full security footage and be a witness if we needed one for any legal proceedings. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately forwarded her contact information to Winston for our files. 2 days later, my sister started a new campaign on social media, this time tagging my employer and Ryson's parents in every post. She wrote long paragraphs about how I was a sociopath who celebrated my wedding while she suffered with permanent facial damage. The posts included close-up photos of her medical bills showing tens of thousands in the hospital costs. She tagged my company's official page saying they employed someone who drove family members to self-harm through cruelty and selfishness. My phone started ringing with a call from HR before I even got to my desk that morning. The HR manager looked tired when I walked into her office for the second time in 2 weeks. She showed me printed screenshots of my sister's posts that someone had anonymously submitted as a formal complaint about my character. She said the company supported me, but the situation was escalating beyond what they'd seen before with personal conflicts affecting the workplace. She handed me a pamphlet about the Employee Assistance Program and suggested I might want to use the counseling services they offered. I went back to my desk and found 3 more emails from coworkers who'd been tagged in my sister's posts asking if I was okay. Ryson suggested we try one more time to work things out with my family through a video call that weekend. I didn't want to, but agreed because maybe seeing each other would help them understand how much this was destroying me. We set up the laptop on our kitchen table and waited for my mom and sister to join the call. My sister's face appeared on screen with her hair still patchy and her cheek twitching worse than before. My mom sat next to her repeating the same thing over and over about how older sisters marry first, because that's tradition. Every time my sister got upset, her face twitched more violently, and my mom would point at the screen saying this was proof of what I'd done to her. We tried explaining that the accident wasn't my fault, but they just kept talking over us about birth order and tradition. After 20 minutes of circular arguments, Ryson closed the laptop, and we sat in silence at the kitchen table. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived from a law firm I'd never heard of with my sister's name as the plaintiff. She was threatening another lawsuit, this time for the emotional damage of seeing me happy in my wedding photos while she was disfigured. The letter demanded compensation for her pain and suffering, claiming my public display of happiness was intentionally cruel given her injuries. Winston called within an hour of me forwarding him the letter and said it was completely baseless, but he'd prepare our defense anyway. He sounded frustrated when he explained that anyone could threaten lawsuits, but courts required actual legal grounds to proceed. That afternoon, Ryson and I walked into our local police station with a folder containing every piece of documentation from the past month. The officer at the desk looked young, maybe 25, and his eyebrows went up as I explained why we needed to file a harassment report. He gave us forms to fill out and took copies of all our evidence, including the social media posts and threatening messages. He handed us a case number and said family disputes were always complicated, but this seemed to be escalating beyond normal sibling rivalry. We left the station with our case number and a business card for a detective who handled harassment cases. 2 days later, Winston called saying Raina had sent over everything from the venue incident, including security camera footage that showed my sister breaking in at 2 in the morning. He forwarded me the video, and I watched my sister struggle with that huge flower arch, dragging it up the stairs while talking to herself about being the older one. The footage showed her falling down the stairs tangled in fake flowers, then getting back up and trying again with an even bigger arch she'd brought. She looked completely crazy hauling these massive decorations into the building, tripping over her own supplies and crashing into everything. Winston said this was the best evidence we could have asked for since it showed her breaking and entering, plus causing all that damage. He was adding it to our harassment file, along with Raina's written statement about the $10,000 in repairs. That same afternoon, Ryson's phone rang and his mom's name showed up on the screen. She spoke quietly, choosing her words carefully, saying they needed some space from all the drama surrounding our wedding. Ryson's face went pale as she explained they couldn't handle the stress of my family situation right now. She said they supported us but needed to step back for their own peace of mind. After Ryson hung up, we sat on the couch in silence, both understanding but feeling more alone than ever. My sister was winning at pushing everyone away from us, making us look like the source of all this chaos. 3 days passed before Ryson brought up an idea while we were eating takeout on the living room floor. He suggested we have a small dinner with just our closest friends, people who actually celebrated our marriage instead of treating it like a tragedy. We could create one good memory from our wedding time since the actual day had been ruined by empty seats and guilt. I agreed, and we picked a quiet restaurant downtown, deciding to only tell the 5 friends we wanted there. We didn't post about it anywhere or mention it to anyone else, just sent individual texts to each friend. The following Tuesday, a package sat on our doorstep when I got home from work. No return address or shipping label. Inside were pieces of old family photos that had been burned around the edges, my face specifically targeted in each one. At the bottom was a note in my sister's shaky handwriting that said, "You stole my life, I'll take yours," written over and over. My hands shook as I called Ryson, then immediately dialed 911 like the detective's card had instructed. Within 20 minutes, a police officer was at our door taking photos of everything and carefully putting the burned pictures into evidence bags. He looked concerned as he examined the note, saying this was definitely enough to pursue an immediate restraining order against my sister. He gave us another case number and said to document any other packages or contact attempts. He also suggested we install cameras if we hadn't already, and vary our daily routines for safety. Winston got the police report the next morning and immediately started filing paperwork for an emergency protective order. He called that afternoon saying we had a court date for the following week, and I'd need to testify about the harassment. The thought of seeing my sister in court made my stomach hurt, but Winston assured me it was necessary to stop this from getting worse. He'd already compiled a thick folder of evidence including the venue footage, social media posts, and now the threatening package. Thursday was my regular therapy appointment with Laura, and I spent most of the session crying about how guilty I felt, even though my sister was terrorizing us. Laura helped me see a pattern I'd never noticed before, how my mom had trained me since childhood to give in to my sister's demands. Every birthday, Every holiday, every family event had been about keeping my sister happy so she wouldn't have a meltdown. Laura explained this wasn't normal sibling dynamics, but actually emotional manipulation that my mom had encouraged for years. We worked through specific memories where I'd been punished for not letting my sister have her way, even when her demands made no sense. By the end of the session, I understood that my guilt was programmed, not justified, and my sister's choices weren't my fault. That weekend, an email from my mom showed up with an attached PDF of a $30,000 hospital bill from my sister's venue accident. The email said I should pay it since I'd caused the whole situation by refusing to wait my turn to get married. She wrote 3 paragraphs about how a good sister would take responsibility for the damage she'd caused to our family. I forwarded it straight to Winston, who responded to my mom within an hour, stating clearly that I had no legal or moral obligation to pay for injuries my sister sustained while committing criminal trespass. He copied me on his response, which also noted that attempting to collect money through guilt and manipulation could be considered harassment. Monday morning, Blair showed me something on her phone that made my coffee taste like acid in my mouth. My sister had created a GoFundMe page titled, "Help Me Rebuild After My Sister Destroyed My Life," with photos of her twitching face and singed hair. The description claimed I'd selfishly rushed to get married first, causing her disfigurement and ruining her chance at love forever. Complete strangers were donating money and leaving comments calling me selfish, cruel, and heartless for celebrating while my sister suffered. Someone had donated $500 with a note saying they hoped my sister could find peace after what I'd done to her. The comments section was full of people sharing their own stories about selfish siblings and offering support to my sister. By lunch, the page had raised over $2,000 and been shared hundreds of times. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table with Ryson and made a decision that felt both freeing and sad. I deactivated every social media account I had. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everything just gone with a few clicks. The constant notifications about my sister's posts and strangers' hate had been making me anxious every time my phone buzzed. Without social media, I couldn't see what lies she was spreading or what awful things people were saying about me. Ryson held my hand as I deleted the last account, and immediately I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying rocks in my pockets and finally emptied them. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an email from an address I didn't recognize, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Someone had forwarded me a whole chain of emails showing my sister contacting every single vendor from our wedding, the photographer, the caterer, the florist, even the guy who drove our limo. She was telling them all the same thing, that Ryson and I had committed fraud by booking their services when she was supposed to get married first, according to family tradition and birth order. She demanded they sue us for breach of contract and emotional damages, claiming we'd lied about having the right to get married before her. The photographer had responded asking if she needed mental health resources, which made her send 3 more emails threatening to destroy his business on review sites. I forwarded everything to Winston, who said this was perfect evidence for our case, showing her pattern of harassment extending to innocent third parties. That afternoon, Raina called asking if we could meet at her office to go through the venue damages, and Ryson took off work early to come with me. She had everything itemized on a spreadsheet that made me feel sick just looking at it. $10,000 for the destroyed arch. And decorations my sister had dragged in, $8,000 for electrical repairs after she short-circuited the whole building, $3,000 for professional cleaning to get chocolate out of the carpets and walls. She showed us photos of the destruction that I hadn't seen before. Chocolate splattered 20 feet up the walls, burn marks on the DJ equipment, the ceiling drapery torn completely down and tangled with fake flowers. Raina said she wasn't trying to make me feel bad, but wanted us to understand the scope of damage for our restraining order case. And honestly, seeing those numbers made me feel less guilty about taking legal action against my sister. 2 days later, Ryson's mom called crying because my sister had cornered them at the grocery store, her face twitching worse than ever as she ranted about birth order and family traditions. She'd followed them through 3 aisles explaining how I'd stolen her future by getting married first, her words slurring from the facial paralysis while other shoppers stared. Ryson's dad had tried to walk away, but she grabbed his cart and wouldn't let go, screaming that they needed to understand what their son had done by marrying me out of order. Store security had to escort her out while she yelled about the injustice of younger siblings destroying older siblings' lives, and Ryson's parents went straight to the police station to file their own report. The officer who took their statement said he'd add it to our growing file, and suddenly Ryson's parents understood this wasn't just normal family drama, but something genuinely dangerous. Winston called the next day to tell me my sister had tried filing another civil lawsuit, this time claiming intentional interference with prospective economic advantage because my marriage had damaged her ability to find a husband. The court clerk had rejected it immediately for having no legal basis. But my sister stood at the filing window for 40 minutes arguing about constitutional rights and birth order precedent. Winston said this showed how desperate she was getting, trying anything to regain control over my life through the legal system, even when it made no sense. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning, and I spent Wednesday night unable to sleep, practicing what I'd say to the judge about why I needed protection from my own sister. Ryson drove us to the courthouse early, but when our case was called, my sister's name echoed through the empty courtroom because she hadn't shown up. Her lawyer was there looking embarrassed, saying he'd tried calling her multiple times but she wasn't answering, and the judge granted a continuance to give her another chance to appear. I was so frustrated I wanted to scream, but Winston said this actually helped our case because it showed she was avoiding accountability for her actions. Friday evening, we came home from dinner to find a wrapped package on our doorstep with no shipping label or return address. just sitting there like someone had placed it carefully. Ryson wanted to call the police immediately, but I recognized my sister's handwriting on the tag that said wedding memories in shaky letters. Inside was a wedding album I'd never seen before, filled with our professional photos, except my face had been scratched out of every single picture with something sharp, leaving just holes where I should have been. Some photos had words scratched into them too. Thief across my wedding dress, selfish over the cake-cutting photo, destroyed her carved into the picture of Ryson and me dancing. Ryson installed motion sensor lights that night, and 3 more security cameras covering every angle of our front door and driveway. The very next night, the cameras caught everything in perfect detail at 3 in the morning when my sister crept up our driveway with a can of red spray paint. She was wearing all black, but her face was clearly visible, twitching and contorting with each movement as she wrote "thief" across our mailbox in huge dripping letters. She stood back to admire her work, then added "marriage thief" on the driveway and "selfish sister" on Ryson's car before the motion light startled her and she ran. We downloaded the footage immediately, and Ryson drove it to the police station on a USB drive while I sat in our kitchen shaking, and the officer said this was criminal vandalism and would be added to our case file. Monday at work, HR called me in again, but this time with good news, saying they'd reviewed our situation and wanted to offer additional counseling sessions through our employee assistance program. Blair came with me to the meeting for support and had been documenting everything in a binder she'd started, with dates and times and screenshots all organized with tabs. She'd become an unexpected friend through all this, checking on me every day and helping me stay focused on work when my mind wanted to spiral about my family. The permanent restraining order hearing finally happened 2 weeks later, and this time my sister showed up looking worse than ever, her hair growing back in patches and her face twitching constantly. I testified about all the harassment while Winston presented our evidence: the emails to vendors, the vandalism footage, the scratched wedding album, the police reports from multiple incidents. The judge reviewed everything carefully, then granted our temporary restraining order with strict terms. My sister had to stay 500 feet away from us, our home and our workplaces, with 0 contact through any method including third parties. My sister started crying, but only one eye would close, making her look even more disturbing as she wailed about injustice and birth order, but the judge warned her that any violation would result in immediate arrest. That night, my sister posted on every social media platform about being silenced by a corrupt system that doesn't understand family traditions, with a photo of the restraining order. Within hours, her supporters were sending me anonymous hate mail through my work email since I deleted all my social media, calling me heartless, selfish, and worse for using the legal system against my own sister. Winston documented each one as a violation of the no-contact order, building our file for the permanent order hearing, while I tried to focus on moving forward with my life despite the constant attacks. My phone started ringing from unknown numbers every few hours, and each time it was my mom using a different phone to tell me my sister's face was getting worse because of the stress I was causing her. Laura sat with me in her office teaching me breathing exercises and practicing how to let the calls go to voicemail without listening, but my hands still shook every time an unknown number appeared on my screen. The calls came at work, during dinner, in the middle of the night, always with the same message about how I was destroying my sister by refusing to drop the restraining order. 2 days later, our landlord knocked on our door holding a stack of papers, complaints my sister had filed saying we were running a drug operation and having loud parties every night. He looked tired as he explained that he had to investigate every complaint, but the security footage showed my sister spray painting our property at 3 in the morning, so he was banning her from the building permanently. He handed us a letter confirming the ban and said he'd already sent copies to the police for our files. That same week, Winston called with news that the district attorney was filing criminal charges for the venue break-in, based on all the evidence Raina had provided. The process server found my sister at my parents' house, and when he handed her the papers, her facial tics got so bad she couldn't speak properly, just making garbled sounds while her face contorted. Winston spent 3 days going through our phone records and found over 400 blocked call attempts from my sister's number in just 2 weeks, plus another 200 from numbers traced back to burner phones she'd bought. He organized everything into a binder with tabs for each type of violation, timestamps highlighted in yellow, and a summary sheet showing the pattern of escalation. The permanent restraining order hearing happened on a Thursday morning, and I wore my most conservative outfit while practicing my testimony in the car. My sister showed up looking worse than ever, her hair still growing back in random patches, and her face twitching so violently that people in the hallway stepped back when she passed. I testified for 20 minutes about the harassment, the vandalism, the constant calls, the social media attacks, while Winston presented each piece of evidence methodically. My sister tried to interrupt, but her words came out slurred, and the judge had to ask her to sit down 3 times. The judge reviewed everything for what felt like hours before granting a 2-year restraining order, with strict terms including no contact through third parties, and a warning that any violation would result in immediate jail time. Walking out of the courthouse, I sat in our car for 10 minutes just breathing while Ryson held my hand, and I realized my shoulders had been tensed up near my ears for months. Back in our apartment, I lay on the couch while Ryson made tea, and for the first time since the wedding, the knot in my stomach started to loosen. That relief lasted exactly 1 day before my mom posted on Facebook that she was standing by my sister because real family supports each other through everything, effectively announcing to everyone that she'd chosen her over me. I blocked her on every platform while tears ran down my face, mourning not the mother I had, but the mother I'd always needed and never gotten. 3 nights later, we finally had the dinner we'd planned with the friends who'd actually celebrated our marriage. Just 6 people at a quiet restaurant where nobody knew our story. They gave little speeches about love and strength and watching us fight for our happiness. And sitting there with Ryson's hand in mine, I felt married for the first time since our wedding. On the drive home, Ryson mentioned that maybe we should look at apartments in the next neighborhood over, somewhere we wouldn't risk running into my family at the grocery store. Part of me wanted to refuse, to stand my ground and not let them drive us from our home. But I knew that peace mattered more than pride, and started looking at listings on my phone that night. The harassment shifted after the restraining order, dropping to anonymous letters that arrived every few weeks with no return address but my sister's distinctive handwriting visible through the envelope. We logged each one with the police, adding them to our ever-growing file, building evidence for the inevitable next incident. Sure enough, 3 weeks later, my sister got arrested outside our building at 2 in the morning, caught on camera trying to jimmy our mailbox open with a screwdriver. The police took her in but released her with just a warning since she claimed she was confused and thought it was her own mailbox, even though she lived across town. The warning didn't stop her from trying again 2 weeks later, this time caught by our neighbor who called the police when he saw her lurking by our door at midnight. Each incident got documented, photographed, filed away in the binder that had grown so thick we needed a second one, evidence of a harassment campaign that showed no signs of stopping despite court orders and arrests. The prosecutor called 2 weeks later to tell me my sister had accepted a plea deal for the venue break-in, getting 6 months probation and mandatory counseling instead of jail time. I sat at my kitchen table holding the phone while he explained the terms and conditions she'd have to follow. Raina called right after to check on me and said she hoped my sister would get real help, but doubted someone that far gone would ever change. Ryson rubbed my back while I processed the news. Neither of us sure if probation was enough, but both too tired to fight for more. The next morning I drove to the grocery store for milk and eggs, when I saw my sister's car in the parking lot. My stomach dropped as I scanned the aisles through the window and spotted her near the produce section. I backed out of my parking spot slowly and drove to a different store 10 minutes away. My hands shook on the steering wheel the whole drive, but I felt proud of myself for leaving instead of going in anyway. At work that week, Blair pulled me aside after my performance review meeting with our boss. She told me my review was solid despite everything that had happened this year, and that our coworkers respected how I'd handled the whole situation. I'd been so worried about my reputation at work that hearing this made my eyes water. Blair squeezed my shoulder and said I was rebuilding stronger than before. That weekend, Samir showed up at our apartment with a keyring in his hand. He explained that he and his wife had a guest house behind their main house that was sitting empty. They wanted to offer it to us while we looked for a new place without the pressure of our current lease. Ryson and I looked at each other and I started crying because having a safe temporary space meant we could actually plan our next move. We packed boxes that same night, wrapping dishes in newspaper and sorting through closets. 3 days later, we moved into Samir's guest house, a small but clean space with its own entrance and a little garden. From there, we started looking at apartments in quieter neighborhoods where we wouldn't run into my family. After 2 weeks of searching, we found a perfect 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with good security. The landlord ran our credit and references while we waited in the lobby. When he came back with the lease to sign, my hand shook as I wrote my name. Ryson signed next to me and we got our keys right there. Moving boxes into the new place felt different this time. Each one we carried up the stairs, taking us further from the chaos. We unpacked slowly over the next week, setting up our kitchen and hanging pictures on the walls. On our official moving day from the guest house to the new apartment, a letter arrived with my mom's handwriting on the envelope. I opened it standing in our empty guest house while Ryson loaded the last boxes in the truck. She'd written 3 pages mixing declarations of love with blame for destroying our family by choosing Ryson over blood. She said she'd always love me but couldn't forgive me for what I'd done to my sister's face and future. I read it once all the way through, then folded it carefully and put it in the evidence binder with all the other letters. Ryson found me sitting on the floor and helped me up without asking what was wrong because he already knew. We drove to our new apartment in silence, both of us understanding this was really the end of my relationship with my family. 3 months passed in our new place before I realized I'd slept through the whole night without waking up in a panic. I lay in bed that morning staring at the ceiling, amazed that I'd actually gotten 8 hours of real sleep. My sister's twitching face still showed up in my dreams sometimes, but Laura had taught me in therapy to remember that her choices weren't my responsibility. The electrical accident happened because she broke into a venue, not because I got married first. I'd started believing it more each week, though some days were harder than others. Ryson noticed the change too, saying I seemed lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying rocks in my pockets and finally emptied them out. One Saturday afternoon, we decided to finally go through our wedding photos that had been sitting in a box since the ceremony. We spread them out on our living room floor, hundreds of images from what should have been the happiest day of our lives. Most showed me with a forced smile or Ryson looking worried, the stress visible even through professional editing. We sorted through them slowly, setting aside the ones with empty chairs where my family should have been. Then Ryson held up one photo from the reception where we were both genuinely laughing at something Samir had said during his toast. Our faces looked relaxed and happy for just that one moment, a tiny pocket of real joy in the middle of all that chaos. We bought a simple black frame that afternoon and hung it in our living room, choosing to remember that moment of happiness we'd fought so hard to protect. That's it for today's story. I really hope it added a little brightness to your day. Subscribe if you'd like to come back for more moments like this.